The program tonight is called When is Natural Landscaping Truly Natural? And Tom Small is a philosopher at heart, so I think we're all looking forward to hearing his thoughts on this subject. Tom is the co-founder of our Kalamazoo area chapter, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary next year. And he's also the co-author of Using Native Plants to Restore a Community. This book here, it's wonderful if you haven't had a chance to look at it. And without further ado, everyone give a warm welcome to Tom Small. Quinn wanted me to show you the forward and back for your slides, just this one and that one.
Okay. Good.
Stay close to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. And thank you all for being here. What wonderful faces and hands as well, yes. Thank you. Well, when is natural landscaping actually natural? I'm not sure that's the basic question that I will be addressing tonight, but I will be addressing some questions that are related to that. You may, at some point, feel that you've stumbled into a lecture on art history, but bear with me, and the chances are fairly good that by the end of this we will be more or less together. I'm going to deal with wild ones, how we got here, how we understand the term natural and the term landscaping, if we do. And I'm going to try to deal with change, the challenges that we are faced in terms of change. The Upanishads tell us that everything is changing in this ever-changing world, and everything is changing and will change for wild ones. Ruth and I have just come back from a 4-day conference at Pendle Hill near Philadelphia with Quaker Earth Care Witness. And it was an exciting time because we met the new General Secretary for Quaker Earth Care Witness, who delivered a kind of manifesto on rewilding Quaker Earth Care Witness. And maybe that's kind of a subtopic of my talk tonight, rewilding wild ones. We'll see. Let us begin by recognizing that the land we are meeting on is ancestral land of the Anishinaabe nations, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe or Chippewa, and the Odawa or Ottawa. We acknowledge their many centuries of care and stewardship for these, their homelands. Let us honor them and their spirit in our nurturing and restoring of the land they love and on which they still reside. The soil, the native plants, and all our relations. We are one. Let it be so. I'll begin with some of the challenges. The diagram is of the planetary boundaries as defined in 2023, this year, by major scientists from the world over working through the Stockholm Resilience Center. There are 6 of the planetary boundaries that we have already transgressed. We are beyond the safe limit in 6 out of 9 of those boundaries, which are the support systems for planet Earth and for us as the human species. We don't know, says one of the directors, how long we can keep transgressing these key boundaries before combined pressures lead to irreversible change and harm. And you see the diagram of the planetary boundaries down there on the right corner. In 2009, we had transgressed 3 out of 9. 2015, 4 out of 9. Now 6 out of 9 in 2023, including climate change, novel entities such as radioactive materials, plastics, synthetic chemicals, and so forth. Biosphere integrity, the land, biogeological flows, nitrogen and phosphorus primarily, way beyond the boundaries. And Václav Smil, one of the foremost scientists on energy flows, tells us that what we are doing to the nitrogen cycle is probably ultimately more dangerous to us than what we're doing with the carbon cycle. And that has a lot to do with chemical fertilizer. Challenges to us, and yet permeating and underlying all of these interactive categories is the disintegrating force of a culture and a worldview. And it's that culture that I'm going to try to outline for us tonight, or at least a couple of different levels, aspects of it. Another challenge that we face is the revolution that's taking place in our view of native plants themselves and of all plants. The emergence in scientific thought of the notion of the wood wide web, a communicative web whereby plants, trees, all plant species communicate with one another in an intelligible kind of language and signaling. That there is, in those networks, those webs, underneath the soil and in the air, a system of communication that indigenous peoples were long aware of in past millennia, and which we tend to have forgotten. We've forgotten the language. But as Robin Wall Kimmerer tells us, the plants remember when the people have forgotten. So the plant intelligence, the elders, is something that we will be reckoning with over the course of the next few decades. Something that I'm aware of, I think most of you are aware of it. I don't know that we've adjusted to it yet. I don't know that we've really begun even to touch the surface of the changes that might be coming and that are inevitable and that we must deal with as we become more and more aware of the intelligence and the kind of elderhood of the plant species who precede us on this earth. Language and culture also present a challenge. We've forgotten the language of the plants. And Native Americans such as Jeff Grignon, the regenerative forester of the Menominee Nation in Wisconsin, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, scientist, mother, member of the Citizen Nation of Potawatomi, both agree that we need a new grammar. We need a grammar of animacy, of the living earth, and its intelligence and its communication for us and with us. That as we become aware of this plant intelligence, we're going to be shifting from a sense of the control that we have or that we seek or that we have had over the plant world and what was formerly to us the inanimate part of our world. As we become more and more aware, we are going to have to change. Language and culture, in particular the English language, which is largely a language of nouns. It's a language that characterizes the world in terms of things, rather than in terms of verbs and actions. Most Native American languages are at least 75 to 80% verbs. The English language is about 75% nouns. It makes a big difference. It's a limit, a serious limitation to the way we see things and what we see when we look. And indigenous peoples in general, Native Americans with their different language, their different sense of the action of living beings, see a different landscape when they look at the world from the landscape that we see. And we're just becoming, again, aware of that, too. And that's another challenge to us, and a challenge to the way we do and the way we see. There are other challenges. Artificial intelligence, the loss of the commons, privatization and commodification of everything virtually, all a kind of cultural mindset or worldview which we're confronted with and in a way boxed in by most of the time. But what I want to move on to is a dream that our culture has had from time immemorial, the dream of order and control, and also of restoration of what is lost. It's a timeless dream. It's taken many, many forms, and I'm going to deal with only one or two of those forms tonight. But they're kind of the root of my theme and my talk. The first image that I'm presenting of that dream of order is dating from the 15th century. And it's the Garden of Love. This is a miniature for the Roman de la Rose, which culturally had a tremendous influence on the whole of European and Western culture, combining the biblical theme of the hortus conclusus, the walled garden, one aspect of which is, of course, the Garden of Eden, but another of which is the pagan Garden of Love that became so powerfully imagined in the culture of the Renaissance. That hortus conclusus, when the phrase comes from the Song of Solomon, the walled garden, and combination with classical aminus locus aminus, the pleasant place of relaxation, of comfort, of peace. And that's what the Garden of Love is in this depiction. It's the Garden of Love. It's the Garden of Venus recovered from the pagan world in the classical world of the Renaissance. And it's a secret garden. There's a key to it and a lock, and a woman bears the key and opens the door to the courtly lover. But it's a walled garden with raised, walled, and closed beds one thing that you will recognize is the lawn, the meadow of wildflowers that is the basis of this garden of love. And that is, of course, natural. In all this midst of this kind of what we would see as artifice, there's a constant, that idea of the lawn, of what the poet and playwright Christopher Marlowe evokes in his play Edward II from the end of the 16th century. My men, like satyrs, grazing on the lawn, shall dance the antic hay. A rewilding in itself on the lawn, the meadow, the green wildflower meadow, and the satyrs with their goat feet. There's going to be a lot about goats in this talk, so prepare yourselves. All right, the garden of love. Next, another kind of garden that we feel we have gotten beyond. The gardens of Vaux-le-Vicomte and of Versailles, both designed by famous landscape architect of the time, André Lenotre. And through tricks of perspective, he made the vistas from the chateau, the royal chateau, and the order of the landscape appear to rise and stretch to the horizon and beyond. So beyond this closedness, there is an openness, a reaching for infinity, a reaching for a kind of freedom. And there are other images of it as well in this kind of garden. Beyond the immediate confines of those geometrically designed vistas is what they call the wilderness. And the border to the wilderness is evergreen, because this is a garden which does not change in the seasons. It's always the same. It's the recovery of what was lost, the order, the unchanging, ever unchanging order of nature. Nature before the fall, and all of that disorder that came with the fall. Louis XVI, the progenitor of this garden, took over in 1661, when he reached his majority, took over from the Queen Regent, and declared himself the prime minister. I am in control now on the law and order ticket. Sound familiar? Well, we're still there, aren't we? We're kind of coming back. It's always recurring. And that vision of the lost garden is a constant in our culture. Next, 18th century vision. Something rather different. A garden park is designed by Lancelot Capability Brown, called Capability because he would look at somebody's estate and say, that landscape has capability. And in would come the army of workers with their shovels and their scythes and their manpower earth movers, and change that landscape into one of beautiful order. And what was that order? Clumps of trees and a meadow. Basically, a savanna. And that image, that vision is still with us. It's still a very powerful one in our culture. Because in 1755, when this place was designed, the maintenance was done largely by sheep. 1830, the invention of the lawnmower. The maintenance changed from sheep power to human power and then motor power. A different notion of the landscape and its maintenance, but to the same end. And a different vision of nature and what it was like and what restoring it would be like, but basically one of control still, of order. The difference between Versailles and Chatsworth is that in Chatsworth, the immense labor and expense is all concealed. Louis XVI wants you to see it. The Dukes of Devonshire want to conceal it. Oh no, no effort involved. This is just nature. Right? The dream of restoration involves, of course, a sense of loss. This is The Golden Age by Lucas Cranach the Elder, 1530. This image of nude people dancing in a circle is a recurrent one for the last 500 years. We'll see it again later in the 20th century. Nude couples, all in relaxed, wonderfully meditative or active poses. And again, a walled garden with a kind of rugged, wilderness-like, mountainous world beyond. But one that's there, but excluded, boxed in, boxed away from this walled garden with its wildflower meadow. Again. The image that I'm going to concentrate on for a while now is the image of Arcadia, which is, again, the lost green world. And it's the lost world of shepherds, of goat herds, of Pan, the god of nature. Arcadia is a place, a district in the Peloponnesus in Greece, and it becomes a place to reckon with in classical times and again in the Renaissance. And we're still reckoning with it, and you'll recognize it as we go on. Here is The Herdsman by Claude Lorraine, one of the major painters influencing our notion of landscape and what a landscape is and how we relate to it. And this is titled The Herdsman. And it's typical. It's a typical vista opening out into a kind of golden beyond. A golden beyond that suffuses the whole landscape with its light and its pleasant kind of tranquility and yet energy. And here is the herdsman reclining, resting, while his goats graze on the lawn, if you will. And that image is constant really from the time of Theocritus, Greek 3rd century BC, and Virgil, 1st century Roman author. This slide, the top left, is from a 5th century manuscript, and it's an illustration of the opening lines of Virgil's first eclogue, the opening line of which is, "O Melibæus, a god has made this leisure ours." This wonderful land of song, of love, of repose, of comfort, and of goats and sheep and cattle and herds and lovers. And the same pair of Melibæus and Tityrus in the Lucan Masters version in 1410, in Francis Clain's version in 1654, and Aristide Maillol's version in 1926. All versions of the first opening lines of Virgil's first eclogue. And that's taken up by subsequent authors, and the notion of Arcadia is just an absolute constant. As I'm going to go back. Back to the herdsman, and the quote from Jim Corbett, one of my favorite environmentalists. I'll say more about him in a little bit. From the time man and woman tasted the fruit of knowledge and, becoming self-conscious, stepped out of nature into history, we have dreamed of the age when we were or will be at peace with all that lives. The place before and beyond exile has many names in the poetries of the Western world. It is Arcadia. Here's Thomas Cole, the American painter, 19th century, founder of the Hudson River School of Painting, one of the predominant influential schools of painting in American history and art history generally. Thomas Cole, the Arcadian or Pastoral State, a painting that he did in 1834, depicting a kind of moment of balance between nature and humanity, freedom and order, liberty and power, when everything was balanced. Of course, that was in the past. That's lost. And that painting was part of a series. There we are. The Arcadian or Pastoral State is the second in the series. The first is the savage state, what we would now call the hunter-gatherer state or condition. The third, after the pastoral or Arcadian state, is the consummation of empire, followed by the fourth state, destruction, fire, storm, conflict, violence, destroying from within and from without all that whole process had developed. And finally, desolation, where all is gone and nature comes back and takes over again. And you'll notice that in all five of those paintings, it's the same landscape, the same mountain in the background, merely transformed in those five separate, distinct, and yet processional stages. We've kind of gotten beyond that a little bit now. That's the stadial view of things. We no longer regard the barbaric and the pastoral states as primitive. Maybe they knew it better than we did. We're getting back to that dream of Arcadia. And there it is, Thomas Cole's painting of 1838, The Dream of Arcadia. And what's really interesting about that particular painting, to those of you who are Star Wars fans, is that it was demonstrably a model for Naboo, the ideal planet of Star Wars, home planet of Padme Amidala, advocate for peace and preservation or restoration of the Republic. at the time of empire, whether it's the Star Wars Empire or the Roman Empire of Virgil's time, or the Elizabethan Empire of the time of the popularity of the Arcadian myth, or our own empire now. The problem with Arcadia, of course, is that it can't last. And here's another famous painting by Nicolas Poussin titled Et in Arcadia Ego. I also am in Arcadia. And there are the shepherds again, always the shepherds, always the same kind of landscape. But Et in Arcadia, and they're looking at this monumental gravestone on which is inscribed, I also am in Arcadia. Death. It's more explicit in an earlier painting by Guercino called The Pastoral Shepherds, or Arcadia, or Et in Arcadia Ego, where they're looking at a skull. And that's the inevitable decay and death of the dream and the place. Here's another version from the early 19th century, 1802. Hubert Robert, the landscape architect for the park at Ermenonville in France, one of the more popular and widely known and widely imitated imitations of Arcadia, versions of Arcadia. And in this one, there is the tomb of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the author of The Social Contract and of probably his most famous phrase, "Men are born free, but everywhere they are in chains." That sense, again, of the loss of what was once there, what we were born with, what we have lost, Arcadia. And this is a version of Arcadia, and the central part of it is the tomb of Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the Isle of Poplars there in the center of the landscape. And that's the place where those who are disillusioned, fed up with civilization and all its corruption, go to recover their souls and their sense of freedom and their life in Arcadia. Here's another Claude Lorraine. And this is the beginning of a little sequence about pictures replacing nature, images replacing, quote, nature, unquote. This is a landscape titled With the Rest on the Flight into Egypt. And the holy couple are down there in the right at rest in this picturesque landscape. And these landscapes by Claude became an immense influence on the picturesque. And people saw them as pictures, virtually as paintings. And one of the dictionary definitions of landscape, as a matter of fact, is a painting. In the upper right corner, you see a man with a clawed glass. And that drawing by Thomas Gainsborough dates probably from about 1780, somewhere around there. Tourists went around with clawed glasses, a convex mirror, tinted kind of pinkish and golden, and they held it up to the landscape and made a picture of it like a clawed painting. And they were known as clawed glasses, and they were very popular. Clawed glasses, looking at the world through or with clawed glasses as a series of pictures of landscapes. Here's something a little closer to home, Albert Bierstadt, the Rocky Mountains, Landers Peak. But there is no such place as Landers Peak. Bierstadt imagined it, created it out of whole cloth. This is not a painting of any particular place. It's a painting of an imaginary world, the Rocky Mountains, a landscape complete with Native Americans and their encampment, and all the ingredients of an idealized landscape. And what Bierstadt says about that painting is, to me, more significant even than the painting itself. Upon that very plain where an Indian village stands, a city populated by our descendants may rise. And in its art galleries, this picture may find a resting place. The nature imaginary that is depicted in that painting becomes, for Bierstadt, a picture which will be hanging in an art gallery in the very place he painted. All of it purely imaginary, but nonetheless a picture, a landscape. And this is another step in pictures replacing landscapes. Landscapes replacing nature. Landscaping replacing nature. You see where this is going. I'm sorry about it. Yeah, I apologize. Go get coffee if you need to. Picture replaces nature. Here's another instance, Henri Matisse, Joy of Life. You recognize this? It's an Arcadian landscape, complete with Venus and the circle dancers and the shepherd playing on the flute and the sheep and another young woman here playing on a double and pan flute, and lovers, all of the ingredients. Sea, forest, meadow, sky. The lawn is yellow. What is a lawn? It's a wildflower lawn, of course. But here, Matisse has declared his independence of, natural color. He's depicting an inner state. And the whole thing is set up in a curious, as some art critics have noted, it's a kind of stage picture with its own pictorial space and perspective, like looking through the side curtains and through a proscenium arch into a stage set. And the audience for this painting, when he exhibited it in 1906, were scandalized by the liberties that he took. The liberation from classical form and from appearances, the mere appearances of nature itself. The kind of final stage of pictures replacing nature is, I think, René Magritte's The Human Condition of 1933. And if you look carefully, you see that we're looking out through a window, through a frame, and that part of the landscape out there is obscured by a painting of that landscape, which is a painting that is continuous with the landscape itself. So we're seeing a picture of a landscape through the ultimate clawed glass, the window of a house, which frames with its curtains and its stage setting the landscape itself and reproduces it as a picture. And René Magritte says of this title painting, The Human Condition, "This is how we see the world," he wrote to André Breton in 1934. "We see it outside ourselves, and nevertheless we only have an image of it inside us. We are alienated. It's the ultimate Claude glass and kind of alienation from nature. A picture replaces nature, or what remains of it, the manicured lawn out there, which gives way, of course, to the wilderness, the trees beyond, and the single lone tree there in the landscape." The ghosts of Arcadia, they're all around you. You live with them every day of your life. The Arcadia neighborhood. Arcadia Ales, alas, no longer with us, among the lost. Arcadia Festival site. Arcadia Ballroom in the hotel downtown. Arcadia Creek. Oh my God. Within our lifetimes, Arcadia Creek was liberated. It used to be that the only place you could see Arcadia Creek downtown was through a hole in a bar on East Michigan Street. A hole in the floor. You could go in there, oh, there's Arcadia Creek down there. Now it's liberated, right? No. No, it's still boxed in, it's still contained. It's the nightmare of Arcadia, not the dream of Arcadia. But it's there, along with the Arcadia Dental Office and the Arcadia Pharmacy and the Arcadia Post Office and all those wonderful places all around you here in Kalamazoo and its immediate environs, the Kalamazoo area, wild ones. That's kind of where we are, folks. At least on one level. It's not all of it, but that's part of where we are. The ghosts of Arcadia. Oh, and the neighborhood, I think it's wonderful. The Arcadia neighborhood contains the Walden Woods. Well, I've only known one man in my life who really wanted to live in Arcadia. And that was Jim Corbett. I quoted him earlier on. I met Jim Corbett in 1995 at a conference in Cuba, New Mexico, a Quaker conference where he was the keynote speaker, and got to know Jim a little bit. Jim saw himself as Don Quixote, a dreamer out on a mission of knight errantry to save Dulcinea and break the enchantment under which she and the rest of the world labored. And that's what Jim saw his mission as being, to recover Arcadia. And he used to tell people who were meeting him in airports and had never met him, just look for Don Quixote with glasses. And there's Don Quixote with glasses, and there's without a beautiful olive wood carving of Don Quixote that my stepson brought me from the Canary Islands, without glasses. But Quixote's last dream in Cervantes' novel is calling myself the herdsman Quixotes, and you the herdsman Panchino. We will wander among the peaks, the forests, and the meadows, singing here, lamenting there, drinking of the spring's crystal waters, or from unpolluted creeks, or from rushing rivers. We will be provided with sweet fruit in abundance by the oaks, chairs by the trunks of hardy cork trees, breath by the clear and pure air, light in the night's darkness by moon and stars. It's the dream of Arcadia. And they will be the herdsmen of Arcadia, like my men with satyrs at their goat feet. The new kind of wild ones, if you will. And Sancho Panza's response is, I think, significant. Sancho Panza to Quixote on his deathbed says, look, don't be lazy. Get up out of bed and let's go to the country dressed as herders the way we decided. Maybe behind some bush we'll find the lady Dulcinea disenchanted. We'll just have to look. And there's the dream. Again, phrased a little differently, but it's the same. Recovery of Arcadia. Corbett was the founder of the sanctuary movement. He herded goats in the desert for several years, just finding out whether he could live that way, and he did. And then he devoted much of his life to traversing the Mexican desert in search of lost immigrants trying to get north. And many of them died in that desert, but Corbett knew how to survive in that desert, and he would find the ones who did survive, and he would lead them. And there's a wonderful picture, if I have time I'll show it to you, I've got it sort of at the end, of Corbett leading a family of immigrants across the Rio Grande. He's up to the water, he's up to his chest in the water, and they're carrying their belongings on their back, and he's carrying the baby, leading those immigrants across the Rio Grande. And when I met him, he had given that up. He couldn't do it any longer, suffering from arthritis. And he had taken to what he called the Saguaro Juniper Reclamation Project. And he would buy up leases of government land for grazing, and then graze the absolute minimum of cattle. They had to graze some in order to fulfill the contract, and go about restoring the land, restoring the desert, restoring the grazing lands, restoring the meadows, restoring the creeks, restoring the rivers, restoring the land. And that was the most radical vision I've ever encountered of restoration of Arcadia. And it was right close to home. And Corbett is no longer with us, but probably the most remarkable person, certainly the most remarkable Quaker that I've ever met. Just a few minutes more. I want to touch on some other aspects of recovery that are ongoing around us and that I think we need to be in touch with. We need to be in touch with the spirit of Jim Corbett in these changing times, these times of et in Arcadia ego. And we need to recognize, as I suggested at the beginning, the intelligence of nature, and finally the rights of nature. And the leaders in this, it seems to me, are mostly the indigenous peoples and Native Americans. Not entirely, but they're certainly among the foremost leaders and the foremost activists in the rights of nature movement. And I've included just a poster and a couple of instances. The Yurok tribe in the Pacific Northwest recognizes the rights of the Klamath River, the historic rights of the river itself, which is their home. And not only the rights of the river, but the rights of the entire watershed as a living being. In the word used by Robin Wall Kimmerer in the slide that I showed you earlier on, Bimadziaki, living beings, or the word used by Jeff Grignon, Pematesan, which is life, but not just life, sacred life. That kind of recognition. And here on the lower left is members of the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma defending the rights of Mother Earth. And one of my culture heroes, Casey Camp Horanek, Ponca elder, who, when the Ponca were considering how do we go about recognizing and affirming the rights of our home rivers, the Arkansas and Little Salt rivers, how do we do that? She led a delegation to New Zealand, where the Maori, or the Whanganui iwi, had recently recognized the rights of the Whanganui River and the whole Whanganui watershed. And so they came back and tried to model what they were doing with the Arkansas and Little Salt rivers after the New Zealand thing. And you can do a search on any of these kinds of things, the Whanganui, the Ponca, and come up with all kinds of really interesting information about the rights of nature movement as the First Nations of North America are viewing it and acting upon their, as they see it, heritage. In southern Latin America, there are similar movements, and in many ways they're way ahead of us here in North America in recognizing the rights of nature in the Constitution of Ecuador and Bolivia, recognizing the rights of the whole Amazon watershed in Brazil. Acting upon those rights is another question, of course, but they're ahead of us by a long shot in the recognition and the legal recognition and personhood of those living Bimadziaki living beings. Another aspect of that same thing, the land back movement. And it's taking hold. We are, to one extent or another, turning land back to the Native Americans, the First Nations from which we stole it. The Bison Range is in the middle of the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana. 18,500 acres. Teddy Roosevelt took it away from the reservation unilaterally and declared it a nature preserve. And the Native Americans weren't even allowed to work there. They were totally excluded, fenced out of the nature preserve. Took them 100 and some years. They've got it back. They own it now outright. It's been given back to them, with the help of some foundation monies, of course. But they've got it back, and they've got full control of it. their land, the Blackfoot Bison Range. And it's an actual bison range. It has in effect been returned to the commons because it's open to the public. It's open to everybody. But what's being restored there is bison and an entire culture. Not just the land, an entire culture that includes human beings and bison and the whole cultural way of life that goes with that. The Great Bear Rainforest is now co-managed by a large number of tribes in the Canadian Pacific Northwest, 15 million acres of rainforest. Greenpeace and Nature Conservancy and Quakers and all kinds of organizations helped that along, contributed to that. But the leaders finally are the Native Americans, the First Nations themselves, and they're the ones who are taking over. 700 square miles of Pacific coast. The Yurok and 2 other tribes have declared this a person, and we declared it to be alive, and we're going to take over stewardship of it. And we're going to act upon it because the governments are moving too slowly. Sorry, folks. We're going to do it. So there are all kinds of levels operating here. And Bears Ears National Monument, restored to its full boundaries by the Biden administration after a lot of the monument was taken away by the Trump administration. The problem with that kind of thing is one administration says one thing and the next administration says no, and then yes, and then no, and then yes, and you never know. But now 5 tribes have co-management of Bears Ears National Monument, and that's a real step forward. That's a wonderful thing. Okay. I have 2 conclusions here, and I couldn't decide between them. So you get both of them. Kind of a bonus. And the first one is Native American. The words that come before all else. That's the true translation of what we've come to know as the Thanksgiving address of the Haudenosaunee, whom we have come to know wrongly as the Iroquois. They call themselves the Haudenosaunee, and they are the 6 tribes, the 6 tribes of peace, descended from the great peacemaker, Hiawatha, which has nothing to do with Longfellow's Hiawatha. Longfellow's Hiawatha was actually named Nanabojo. And although Nanabojo is okay for the rhyme scheme and the accentuation, Longfellow didn't like the sound of Nanabojo, which is an Anishinaabe name. So he substituted the name Hiawatha, which actually is Haudenosaunee. So it all gets mixed up. That's neither here nor there. Anyway, those words of the Thanksgiving address are for the Haudenosaunee, the words that come before all else, and they're words of thanks. They're prayers of thanks, greetings of thanks, greetings to all the elements, greetings to all the animals, to all the plants, the domesticated plants, the food plants, the wild plants, the stars, the moon, the sun, all those living beings, Bimadzirki, Pematesim, all those living beings, in the words that come before all else, are thanked. And the final thanks is my conclusion, my first one. Today we have gathered, and these are words from the Thanksgiving address, and see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living beings. So now we bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now our minds are one. My second conclusion is from the book, Using Native Plants to Restore Community. And it's an illustration that I commissioned for the book from a Quaker artist, Liz Henderson. And I told Liz the story of the Celtic world tree, and I told her the story of Indra's net, the net over Indra's palace, one of the lords of the universe. It's a great web, it's the entire universe. And at the intersection of each strand of the web, there is a pearl. And every pearl reflects every other pearl in a kind of infinite regression, so that all things are contained everywhere at all times. And Alfred North Whitehead in Science in the Modern World, and David Bohm, the nuclear physicist, tell me that that's true. That everything is everywhere at all times. Really. Not just imaginary. Really. In a way that we cannot ordinarily perceive because we're boxed in by the walled garden, a version of Arcadia. Not really Arcadia. Well, I gave that commission to Liz not knowing what would turn out. Do me a drawing that's kind of a combination between the world tree and Indra's net. Okay, said Liz. And she went away, and a few days later she came back with this drawing, thinking I really wouldn't like it. This drawing of a tree spiraling upwards and outwards, with the branches interconnected, all with one another, and peopled by birds and children and nestlings on the ground and up in the tree. And I looked at it for a few seconds. I didn't know what to say. And Liz thought, oh, he doesn't like it. And I said, that's it. You got it. That's a miracle. That's wonderful. So I used it in the book, and I put it together with one of my favorite poems, with which I will conclude, by Gary Snyder, For the Children. The rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us. The steep climb of everything going up, up, as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say, the valleys, pastures, we can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children, stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Find Arcadia. Thank you.